Okay, here we are. So this week's Parsha is Parshat Vayeira, which is essentially a Parsha that's really focused on this life story of Avram. And like we discussed last week, Nindarf Leben Mitzar Tzai, we live with the Parsha of the week. We don't just study it, but we live with it and we live with the characters. So we're still living with Avram, which is very special. So I encourage you to take the time to read through the storyline. It's very, very special, this parsha. But what I want to do today is a little bit different. I want to explore a character who doesn't get much attention because it's a character that's just mentioned in one verse, one pasuk in this week's parsha. But this was something new that I learned this week, and it struck me. And I thought, you know what? I think we can deviate from Avram for just a few moments and explore this character. And because I think there's a tremendous perspective on life that we can learn from this character. So I don't mean to keep you in suspense for so much longer, but who is this person I'm talking about? I am talking about Lot's wife. Okay, so who was Lot? Lot was Avram's nephew. So last week when Avram was instructed by Hashem to leave his birthplace and to travel to the land of Eretz Yisrael, to inherit this new land, to become the father of the Jewish nation, he took along some chevra. And one of the people that came along with him was his nephew Lot. So Lot very much became a part of Avram's family, very much influenced by his uncle Avram. And in this week's parsha, we learn that Lot decides to depart from his uncle, to kind of go out on his own independently, which is not a bad thing. And he relocates to the city of Stone. And the parsha goes into detail about what transpires in the city of Stone, a very traumatic episode, as we'll learn, as we'll read. And it's in this, it's during this very dramatic episode that Lot, Avram's nephew, hosts the angels who are disguised as guests, which was, by the way, a big no-no in the city of Stone, because Stone was a very it was a very inhospitable city. So Lot has these guests over, and eventually the city of Stone, God decides, is just too morally corrupt, too evil. The city of Stone needs to be destroyed. And so Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters are saved from the destruction of Stone. And they are, at the nick of time, they are like whipped out of the city and the whole city is destroyed. So I want to share something that I learned this week from Lot's wife, something that I found very moving. And like I said, because Torah is so significant, there's meaning and there's messages, even in small details in Torah, even in the characters that don't get a lot of attention. So what do we know about Lot's wife? Well, we know very little about her. The scene about Lot's wife actually comes in one short pasuk, one short verse. And this verse doesn't at all seem central to the story. It's often glossed over in the larger story of Sodom. But what I want to do today is zoom into her fate, into her story, and what we can learn from her. So the story of Sodom, just to give you some context, it's a very tragic narrative in the Torah. It was a very sad story. The city of Sodom was a beautiful place. Okay, just envision this. It was like a metropolis, five prospering wealthy cities. Okay, it was beautiful. Imagine, I imagine it to be like, have the feeling of a gated community in an American suburb, right? A great school system and high taxes and kind of like Bronxville, okay? And just a beautiful place to live on many levels. And that's why Lot, Avram's nephew, chose to live there. I mean, he chose to live there for good reason. But the Torah describes that the people of the city were so corrupt, they were so immoral, that Hashem had no option than to destroy the entire city. And the Torah describes how the city was destroyed. It was like an explosion of fire, sulfur, and salt. And that was that. And the entire metropolis was destroyed. Again, it's hard to imagine, something like that happening, but the motto in Sodom was like, was so opposing to the Torah motto. It says in Pirkei Avos that we talk about friendship and caring and collective responsibility. In Sodom, the motto was, what is mine, and what is yours is yours. I don't share what I have. You're not expected to share what you have. So the greed and the selfishness of Sodom was impossible. It like knew no bounds. And that's really why Hashem decided that this place has to be destroyed. And the Torah describes in this narrative how Avram, Lot's uncle, is foretold about the pending destruction of the city. And in this parsha, we read how Avram actually beseeches God, begs him not to destroy the inhabitants. And he tells Hashem, please spare the city and merit of 50 righteous people. So Hashem says, go find 50 righteous people. Avram can't find them. And then he lowers the number to 45, to 30, lower and lower. 10, is there even 10 people worthy enough that the city should be spared? And the answer is no. The city is utterly evil. Hashem's going to destroy the city. But Lot and his family will be saved. Why? Because they are a step ahead. They're a step above. Lot, at the end of the day, retained some of his uncle's moral sensitivity, right? Some of his uncle's influence, his uncle's passion for justice, his uncle's passion for basic morality. And so 2 angels are dispatched for the rescue mission for Lot, and they succeed in dragging out Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters who still live at home. And as they're dragged out of the city, they are given one condition for them to be rescued. One condition. And what's that condition? Fascinating. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see it with me. A pasuk in this week's parsha. Okay, so Parshat Vayeira. I titled today's class, How Obsessive Guilt Can Destroy Your Life. We'll get to that. I want to bring the verse from this week's parsha up on the screen, and I'll read it in English. And it came to pass when they took them outside that he said, flee for your life. Do not look behind you and do not stand in the entire plain. Flee to the mountain lest you perish. So what was the condition? The condition is run and don't look back. Simple enough, right? Just don't look back. Now, we're reading this and we're thinking, okay, this is so simple, but the temptation must have been so great. Curiosity was, like, what's going on back there, right? Like, what's happening to all my friends in my city? And the Torah describes that Lot's wife looks back. Now, I didn't know some of this, and that's why this is so interesting for me to learn. We actually know her name. One of the earliest midrashim on the Torah, the title of the medrash is called Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, identifies Lot's wife and her name was Idis, 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 or or Iris, Iris. So the Torah describes that Idis or Iris looks back, and we'll see what happens. The Torah describes what happened to her. I'll put up the next slide. And his wife looked from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Okay. She still has two daughters back there. That's right. She had two married daughters back there. Maybe that's why she looked back. You bring a very good point, Anita. It describes this in the Medrash that she had two daughters that married, and the son-in-law, Lot's son-in-laws, thought he was crazy, and Lot's son-in-laws were not considered eligible, or not. Hashem didn't think they were worthy enough to be saved, so they were left behind. But Lot, his wife, and two single daughters were saved. I'm going to stop the share for a moment because at this point, I don't have any other slides. So today, which is very, very interesting, for those of you who have visited the area of the Dead Sea in Israel, some tour guides will show you like an image. There's a pillar of salt in the Dead Sea area that is said to look like a woman wearing a shawl. I actually Googled it, and it is kind of, it does look like a woman wearing a shawl. And tour guides will tell you that this is Lot's wife. The stone was located in the southeast region of the land of Israel, near what's known today as the Dead Sea. So it makes sense that she would be in that area. No one knows for sure if that pillar of salt that that the tour guides identify with is really Lot's wife, but the concept is there. It was in that territory of Israel. And what's interesting, and I didn't know this either, was that in ancient biblical times, it seems like she was clearly identified. And how do we know this? Because it says in the Talmud, in the tractate of Brachos, that when someone sees the wife of Lot, he has to make a blessing. Interesting. So the commentaries, like, what bracha do you make when you see Lot? So there's different opinions. Bottom line is, we make the bracha of Baruch Dayan Ha'emes, blessed is the true judge. And you're also supposed to make a second bracha, that giving thanks to Hashem that Lot was saved. So it would seem, that it's very possible that this pillar of salt could very likely be Lot's wife, who the Talmud describes that we actually can identify and make a bracha on. So this is the story we read about in this parsha. It takes exactly 1 or 2 verses in the Chumash. That's it, Zeu. And we usually just skim it over. And it happened a long time ago, right? So what role does this story continue to play in Jewish life? What does it mean for you and me? Well, the answer is that it actually is very relevant to us today. Every single day, we actually have a remembrance of the city of stone and a remembrance of Lot's wife. How do I know this? Because when you prepare your Shabbos table, or you prepare your dinner table when you're having bread, what do we set on our table? We set salt on our table. Salt. And it's a mitzvah to dip our challah, our bread, in salt. And one of the reasons given for this is to remember that Lot's wife turned into salt. Very interesting. Furthermore, in the times of the temple, there was a mitzvah that every korban, that every offering that was brought on the altar had to be accompanied with salt. Very, very interesting. No matter if it was an animal offering, no matter if it was a menachas, a raw flour offering, no matter if it was baked matzah, no matter if it was wood, everything that was brought on the temple was salted on both sides before it went up as an offering. Why was every korban salted? Why was every offering salted? So there are also many reasons given in the commentaries, but one reason given is to remember Lot's wife. And every korban that was given with salt was there to rectify for her actions, for looking back. So somehow the actions of Lot and the story of Sodom continue to play a very important role in Jewish life today and always. And the answer and the question is why? It's very strange. Like, what is so significant about Lot's wife's story that there's like a remembrance of it, and it plays a role, an active role in our day-to-day life. And this is really what I want to focus on today, and hopefully leave you with something inspiring to think about. So I want to just take a few minutes. So the question I want to answer is really, what is the message that we learn from Lot's wife, that we symbolically remember her at every sacrifice, we symbolically remember at every meal, thousands of years later? What was so significant about her actions? I want to take a moment just to deviate for a minute and bring you like some interesting things that I learned at Rashi. Why did Hashem not want her to look back? And why did she look back? And again, there's so many reasons for this. Just put yourself in this woman's shoes. She was a real person who had a real life experience. Like, what's the full picture here? And I found this interesting, and that's why I want to add it here. So why was Hashem so insistent that they don't look back? I think there's a message here also for us, besides for the message we'll get to. But Rashi says something very, very powerful. And Rashi says that Hashem did not want Lot and his family to look back because he did not want them to think of themselves like more deserving in any way than everybody else. At the end of the day, people were being destroyed, and Hashem didn't want them to have to witness that. Like, you don't have to relish in someone else's pain. Yes, you were saved by a hair. You were saved because in the Avram's merit. That's the only reason why you were saved. 4 people from the entire metropolis were saved. Don't think you're that much greater than the people in Sodom. And therefore, you do not deserve to see their punishment while you're being saved. You don't have to relish. You don't have to take pleasure in seeing, people being hurt. Again, just sensitivities here. And I appreciated learning it, and that's why I want to share it. Also, Rashi mentions, why did Lot's wife become a pillar of salt? Why salt? Become a pillar of fire? I don't know. Why salt? So interesting. And this is also, I think, interesting to know. And Rashi says this, the reason why Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt was because she sinned with salt. She refused to provide her guests with salt. 2 angels that Lot and his wife hosted in their home. She really didn't have anything to do with them. It was a rule in the city of Sodom. It was a law. You can't host guests. So if she was going to host guests against her will, because her husband said, we're hosting these 2 men, they're Avram's guests, then she wasn't going to host them in a wholehearted way. She did not provide her guests with salt. So because she sinned with salt, Rashi says she was punished with salt. Just to show us how poor her hospitality was. Another thing that the commentary is saying, I think this was also very interesting. Another reason why she was punished with salt is because when her husband brought home these unwanted guests, right? She was so outraged at him that she went around from neighbor to neighbor asking if she can borrow salt. So this was her way of implicitly like hinting to her neighbors that they were hosting company and that her neighbors should do what they have to do to her guests. And the Torah describes how the neighbors being down on the wall, they wanted to kill the guests. They weren't allowed to be there. So just interesting, and to get a glimpse into her character. So she wasn't a tzaddikus. She was far from a tzaddikus. She was far from a righteous woman. Why was she saved? She was saved purely in the merit of Abraham, of being related to Abram. But the question is, but why was she turned into a pillar of salt? Because there was something about her sin that was especially connected to salt. Chassidus asks, and here where we get into Chassidus. So this is where we're going to put a little new twist onto the story. So until now we've explored this story on a pshat level, which means on a very, very basic level, literal interpretation of the verse. And now we're going to go deeper. So Chassidus asks, there are billions of human beings that have died over the last thousands of years, 5,782 years. Many of them were immoral. Many of them made mistakes. From all of the people who passed away, one person was chosen to remain intact to this very day. And that is Lot's wife. Do you know anybody else that's intact? The pillar of salt. So what is the message here for us? And that's what Chassidus wants to explore. So as I said before, you know this already. Every story in Torah exists on many levels, right? When you begin to learn Torah, you go into a pardes. Pardes means a garden. And pardes, the garden of Torah, is you can learn Torah on many different levels. You can learn Torah on a literal level. You can learn Torah on a deeper esoteric level. So in addition to the literal interpretation of the pasuk, there's also a psychological layer here. There's an emotional layer. There is a metaphor here. There's a reason why this story is recorded in the Torah, and there's a lesson for us today. Chassidus explains that every character in Torah reflects a character that exists in my psyche. Every character we read about in Tanakh is a metaphor for a character that lives in my mind. So there was a physical Lot's wife, Iris, that existed, but there's also an Iris that exists in my head. What is that? So now we're going to explore that. We're going to dig a little deeper. What is the message here for us? So Sodom was a city near the Dead Sea. That's the history. But on a deeper level, Sodom represents a model of living. A certain way of living that's not limited to a geographical location, but it's a place in our hearts. There's a Sodom in each and every one of us. The people of Sodom were selfish. They were narcissists. They were liars. They were cheaters. They were very, very self-centered. There's a little piece of Sodom in every one of us. And yes, I think we all can say without shame that there are times in our life when we stray, we stray from our goodness, we stray from our inherent pure self, and we behave in a destructive way. And we might insult, and we might cheat, and we might lie. And then what happens? like Lot and like Lot's family, we too must run away from our Sodom. We have to run from it. Wherever there's coarseness or wherever there's destruction within us or around us, we need, like the verse says in Torah, we need to run for our life, run for our soul, run for our sanity, for our truth, for our happiness. But there's one condition. And what's that condition? That we shouldn't look back. There's something about looking back that can be very, very lethal. It can be very, very dangerous. It might look very benign, it might look very innocent, it might even be dressed like a chassid, look holy. But looking back is not healthy for us. And this is the message for us. What does it mean to look back? To think about what that means on a psychological level, on a metaphorical level. Very often when we're running away from our Sodom, and whatever this Sodom is in your life, it could be toxicity, it could be, it could be something you generated by yourself, something that you generated by others, but there's something that is causing me to not live my life to its full potential. There's something that's causing me for some reason, I'm not able to connect with my true divine. So when I go running, when I'm trying to run away, the Torah wants to remind me that I shouldn't look back. What does that mean? I shouldn't constantly be examining my past mistakes, to be looking back at my failures, to be stuck in my old patterns, to be forever looking back what was done for me when I was a child, when I was single, when I was just new. Now you don't know what happened to me. I was a victim. I was in trouble. I was hurt. We all have a story, what we did and what was done for us, right? And sometimes we become driven with obsessive guilt, so much guilt. And we can mistake ourselves that the guilt is a good thing, right? We think that, oh, guilt means that we care. Guilt means that we're sensitive. Guilt means that we have a conscience. But no, we're always looking back. If we cannot free ourselves from our past, then we're stuck in Sodom. Then we are stuck in Sodom. We're stuck in that narcissist place. And guilt is another form of Sodom. I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I'm use your own narrative, right? And for the people who had a hard life and who had a history, they could say, they could think like, yes, I have all the reasons to be stuck, because I'm a victim, because I was hurt, because I was abused. The Torah says we can't look back, because our goal needs to be on the future, on growth, on connection, on connecting to our divine. And that's where we say in Chassidus, sometimes we need to get out of ourselves, right? I love the line, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Sometimes we need to be reminded, think of yourself less. What does God need from me? What can I do for God? What is needed of me? Why did Hashem grant me life now? What can I offer? But I need to get out of myself in order to look in that direction. Otherwise, I'm stuck. I'm stuck in an unhealthy place. And this is when some of us turn into salt. We're just salt. We're just salt because we're so stuck. We're stuck in guilt and remorse and in the past. and in a state of victimhood. I think the message of this parsha, and I'm sorry for going a few minutes over, but we're almost done. The message of this parsha is that you cannot look at yourself as a mistake. You are a soul that was brought into existence in this very moment for a reason, for a purpose. You're needed. Your salt is needed. You ever tried having a bowl of soup that has no salt in it? I mean, if you can't have salt for health reasons, I get it. But it's not very tasty. Let's just say, whatever. Right? Salt is important. Our history, our past, it's what gives our life flavor. So it makes us who we are. Salt mixed into other foods is the way it was intended for. But too much salt, too much guilt, too much remorse, too much focusing on our past. When salt becomes the whole dish, not the accompaniment of the dish, but the whole dish, that's it. Then we become salt. Then we're stuck in Sudan. Then whatever I taste is bitter. Then whatever I see is bitter. Then whatever I touch is bitter, right? Because all my experiences are being filtered through one lens, a pillar of salt. So if I can't remove my gaze from sun, if I can't stop looking back, I'll forever just be wallowing in my past. And that's what I become. So we learn from, here we have a fascinating illustration of this in the Wife of Light. All souls on this planet get reincarnated. The Wife of Light is still present, remains as is. Just because the message she teaches us is so important. And what is her tikkun? What is her rectification? Every carbon we put on salt. At every meal we add salt. We dip our challah in salt. We repair the problem of, how do we repair her mistake? We have salt in front of us, front and center in our Yiddishkeit, to know that salt's important. Having a good understanding of our faults and our shortcomings is important. A little salt is needed in our life, in our meals, in our cooking. But remember, not too much. Remember, don't look back. Don't get stuck on that. Don't get too obsessed with it. We can't afford to spend an extra moment in Sudan. And that was the lesson I took from this parsha, from Lot's wife. And Emeret Hashem, when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to meet her. And I think she'll have a lot to share. I'm sure her neshama, her mistake has been, tilted. If you imagine how many karbanos have been given, how many sacrifices have been given with salt to rectify for sin. This woman has to be on a very high level by now, but there's something that she teaches us, and I thought that it was very important that we learn something from her. So I hope you enjoyed the message. You're welcome to unmute yourself.